It was past midnight, and snow was falling like ashes in the wind. A war veteran with haunted eyes walked silently through the dark. Just him and his loyal K9. Then they saw her. A little girl, barefoot and shivering, clutching a newborn baby in the freezing dark. Her lips trembled as she whispered 4 words that would shatter everything he thought he knew. If you saw her, would you stop? Would you turn back? Or step into the storm? Let us know with a yes in the comments if you believe no child should be left alone in the snow. Iron Hollow sat hushed beneath a heavy winter sky, its rooftops softened by a steady snowfall that showed no sign of stopping. A thin fog clung to the pine trees like breath held too long, and the air was dry, sharp, metallic with cold. It was the kind of night when even the owls stayed quiet. No headlights on the road, no music through the walls, only snow and silence and the weight of things unspoken. Gideon Hale walked through it like a ghost returning to familiar ground. His military boots left deep impressions in the white powder as he followed the path near the edge of the woods. At 45, Gideon wore the years not as decoration, but as scars. He had the build of someone who used to be heavier, broader, and now carved by time and solitude. His face was rough-edged, a strong jaw softened only by days-old stubble, brows dark and heavy, lips set in a quiet line. His eyes, a pale, stormy blue, had the look of a man who'd seen too much and said too little. The right side of his face bore a shallow indentation, where an IED had left its mark. He wasn't out here for the beauty of it. Gideon hadn't slept through the night in almost 6 years. Nightmares came in waves, gunfire in the distance, the sound of breathing that wasn't his, the silence after the last heartbeat. Walking helped. Cold helped more. And walking in the cold with Ranger helped most of all. The German Shepherd strode 2 paces ahead, nose low to the ground, tail gently sweeping behind him like a metronome of focus. 6 years old and trained to detect everything from landmines to fear, Ranger was lean and powerful. His black and tan coat thickened for winter. A long scar ran diagonally along his front right leg, a gift from their final tour. He didn't limp. Not anymore. The two had become a fixture in Iron Hollow, a soldier and his dog, rarely speaking, always moving. Some in town said Gideon had a haunted look. Others called him reclusive, odd, but no one ever questioned his dog. Ranger had that air about him, calm, noble, dangerous if provoked, and impossibly loyal. They'd almost completed their loop when Ranger stopped. It was subtle, a shift in weight, ears forward, head tilted, then a low whine. Not of fear, but of something else. Alert, insistent. Gideon followed his gaze down the trail, toward the old bus stop where the road curved out of town. There was a figure in the snow. Small. Too small. He broke into a jog, snow clinging to his boots, heart thudding louder than the wind. Ranger was already moving ahead, steps precise, cautious. The figure emerged from the fog as Gideon neared. A little girl, no more than 6. She stood barefoot in the snow, her feet red with cold, toes curled as if shrinking from the ice. Her blonde hair was tangled, matted with frost, and her cheeks were streaked with frozen tears. She wore a thin pink sweatshirt that hung off one shoulder, soaked and clinging to her small frame. In her arms, she cradled something tightly. A baby. A newborn. Swaddled poorly in an old blanket that had gone stiff with cold. Gideon stopped, every instinct rising. Soldier, protector, survivor. He crouched down slowly, voice low and steady. "Hey there," he said, holding one hand out. "It's okay, you're safe now." The girl blinked up at him, eyes wide and lost. She clutched the baby tighter, trembling, and said in a voice so soft it nearly vanished with the wind, "They took my mom." Gideon didn't ask who, not yet. He shrugged off his coat without a word and gently wrapped it around her. The thick fabric dwarfed her small frame. Ranger stepped forward, lowered his head, and pressed his nose lightly against her wrist. She flinched, then paused. Her eyes locked on Ranger, and for a second, just one, her face softened. She trusted the dog. Gideon exhaled. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you both out of the cold." He lifted the girl into his arms, careful to support both her and the baby. She was light, far too light. He could feel how hard she was gripping her sibling, desperate, refusing to let go. The storm was worsening. Snow fell faster now, carried sideways by wind that howled through the trees. Gideon turned and began the long walk back through the forest trail toward his cabin, buried deep beyond the town's edge. Ranger walked beside them, close, silent, alert. Branches above sagged with snow, and the path narrowed to little more than a thread in the whiteout. But Gideon walked without hesitation. He had made this trek 100 times. He could do it blind. And tonight, maybe he had to. Behind him, the road was already vanishing under drifts, but ahead, where his boots broke the snow and Ranger's paws left steady prints, was the way home. A fire, warmth, shelter, and maybe, just maybe, a beginning. The cabin, tucked deep in the pines of Iron Hollow, creaked softly as the blizzard pressed against its walls. Wind howled through the trees, rattling window panes and piling snow high against the porch railing. Inside, the fire snapped and hissed, casting flickering amber light across the wooden floorboards and the 3 huddled figures within. Luna had refused to leave the baby's side. Wrapped in Gideon's coat, she sat curled in the armchair near the hearth, her arms encircling Jude so tightly it seemed as if letting go might undo her entirely. Gideon crouched beside them, not speaking. He had made tea she hadn't touched. The milk had gone cold. He didn't press her. He knew what silence meant. He had lived inside it for years. Instead, he sat with his back against the wall, his long frame folded into the shadows like a watchful statue. Ranger lay at his feet, chin resting on his crossed paws, eyes still and golden in the firelight. The dog's ears flicked every so often, listening, waiting, feeling the tension ripple through the girl and the man alike. Gideon didn't call the police. Not yet. Something in Luna's eyes had told him this was not something local officers would understand or be able to fix. He knew the look of children pulled from danger, and hers wasn't just fear. It was awareness, a knowing, as if she'd seen something no child should have to carry. So, instead, he waited until her breathing steadied and her shoulders stopped shaking. When she finally looked up, her voice was a thread. "Do you believe me?" He nodded. "Every word." She lowered her gaze to Jude's tiny face. "Mama always said bad people pretend to be good ones, that sometimes they even wear the same clothes." "What kind of clothes?" Gideon asked gently. "White, like nurses, doctors, but they weren't real," Luna added. "They didn't say anything, just pushed her and took her." Gideon felt something coil tight in his gut. Was this at home? Luna nodded. "Our house is near the post office. Mama was packing stuff. She told me if anything happened, I had to hide with Jude, and if she didn't come back, to find someone with a dog." Her fingers reached into the oversized coat she wore, his coat, and, from a small interior pocket, she drew out a delicate silver pendant, heart-shaped and worn from use. She handed it to him wordlessly. He turned it over and read the engraving. "To L. Love always. Mom." He closed his fingers around it and swallowed down the ache that rose. "There's more," Luna said. "She gave me this too." From the same pocket, she pulled a crumpled piece of paper. It had been folded and refolded so many times the creases had gone soft. On it, written in hurried, slanted script, were the words, "If you're reading this, don't trust anyone without a dog." Gideon read it twice. Ranger rose slowly, nose lifting. Without command, he walked toward the back door and let out a soft, short whine. Gideon stood. "What is it, boy?" The dog was pacing now, slow, deliberate, his nose hovering near the floor. He moved in circles, then stopped at the back door, staring. Gideon pulled on a flannel-lined coat and unlatched the door. The storm had dulled to steady snowfall, quiet and relentless. He stepped outside with Ranger at his side, scanning the ground. A fresh dusting covered everything, except near the woodpile. There, faint but visible, were the remnants of boot prints. Too large for Luna, too shallow for someone carrying a child. "Someone was watching," he muttered. Ranger sniffed along the path, tail stiff. The prints led away from the cabin, toward the tree line, and vanished beneath a drift. But it was enough. Back inside, Gideon closed the door and bolted it. He knelt beside Ranger and murmured, "Good boy." Luna watched him silently, the pendant now clasped in both hands. "Your mom," Gideon said carefully. "What's her name?" Sienna Vale." Gideon nodded. "Do you know where she worked?" She used to work at Iron Hollow Medical, but she stopped a few weeks ago. She said something bad happened there. I don't know what, but she was scared. Scared of what? She wouldn't say, just told me we might have to leave someday, that we'd go somewhere safer. He exhaled. And did she ever talk about anyone else? Friends? Family? Luna shook her head. It was just us, and Jude. Gideon leaned back, gaze drifting toward the flames. Something about the girl's story rang all too familiar. Disappearances, false uniforms, children given instructions no child should ever need. He remembered villages overseas where doctors came and left behind more sickness than they cured. But this was home. It was Iron Hollow. He rose and went to a drawer beside the kitchen sink. From it, he pulled an old topographical map and spread it across the table. Ranger sat nearby, ever watchful. Iron Hollow Medical is here, Gideon muttered, tapping a spot near the town's east side. If something happened there, someone must have seen it, or covered it up. Luna didn't speak, just watched him. She looked exhausted, not just in her body, but in her soul, like she'd been carrying too much for too long. You don't have to be brave anymore, he said. I'll do that part now. She nodded once, but didn't speak. Gideon drew a slow breath and returned to his seat beside the fire. Ranger curled up next to Luna, resting his chin on her knee. She blinked down at him, surprised, then ran her fingers through the thick fur behind his ears. It was the first time she smiled. It was faint, but real. Outside, the wind began to howl again, and inside, a soldier, a dog, and 2 children waited for the snow to pass, and for a mother's trail to begin. Morning broke in Iron Hollow with little ceremony, just a slow lightening of the sky behind thick gray clouds. Snow clung stubbornly to the trees and rooftops, and frost webbed across the cabin windows like veins. Inside, the fire had died to embers, but the warmth lingered. Luna was asleep on the couch, wrapped in Gideon's old army blanket, Jude pressed close against her chest. Ranger lay nearby, his head up and ears perked. He hadn't rested. Gideon stood at the window, arms folded, staring into the woods beyond. He hadn't slept either, but the exhaustion in his bones was different from weariness. It was alertness, stretched thin. Something was wrong. He'd felt it since Luna had whispered those 4 words in the snow, and he had no interest in waiting for whoever left those boot prints to return. Instead, he reached for his coat. The road to the town center was still passable by truck, but just barely. Snow crunched beneath tires as he drove the old green pickup down winding roads, Ranger in the passenger seat, watchful as ever. Luna sat behind them, holding Jude tight. Her small face was pale and silent, eyes wide as they passed the familiar but distant edges of the town. They pulled into a long, sloping driveway at the far end of a quiet cul-de-sac. The house at the top was modest and weathered, with peeling blue paint and an American flag faded to pink by sun and time. A small wind chime jangled on the porch. "This is Mr. Clark's," Gideon said. "He's old but sharp, retired electrician, keeps cameras running when the town forgets how." Luna didn't answer, but nodded once. Mr. Marvin Clark answered the door before Gideon could knock. He was in his late 70s, tall and lean, with stooped shoulders and a jaw dusted with white stubble. His eyes were sharp behind thick glasses, and his cardigan hung loose on his wiry frame. "Gideon Hale," he said, voice crackling like old radio static. "It's been years." "Wasn't planning a visit," Gideon replied. "Can we come in?" Clark's gaze moved past Gideon to Luna and Jude, then to Ranger, who stood calmly but firmly beside them. "I guess this ain't a social call," Clark muttered. He stepped aside. "Come on." Inside, the house smelled of pipe tobacco and lemon oil. The furniture was old but clean. A faded recliner dominated the living room. On the wall, next to a photo of a younger Clark in Navy uniform, was a small security monitor and a connected hard drive system. Gideon had hoped the man still ran it. "We're looking for footage," Gideon explained, "from this morning, around 5. Clark scratched his chin. "You think it caught something?" "We think it caught everything." Clark motioned to the couch. "Sit her down. Baby looks half frozen." Luna sat, Jude asleep in her arms. Ranger remained standing, head turned toward the hallway, as if expecting something to emerge. Clark moved to the monitor and pulled up the footage from 4:30 a.m. The angle was wide but high, just enough to capture the intersection down the street from Sienna's house. At 4:58, Headlights cut through the fog. There, Gideon pointed. A large black SUV rolled into frame, crawling to a stop directly in front of the Vale residence. No flashing lights, no warning. Two figures emerged. Both wore white coats, surgical caps, and masks that obscured their faces. They didn't knock, Luna said quietly. On the screen, the two figures approached the house. Seconds passed. Then they reappeared, with Sienna between them. She was upright but slumped, clearly dazed. One of them opened the back door, the other kept watch. "Pause," Gideon said. Clark froze the frame as one figure turned toward the camera. The light hit just right, revealing a sharp vertical scar along the left side of his jaw. It was unmistakable. Luna stood beside them now. "That's him," she said, pointing. "He looked back at me through the hallway mirror. He didn't blink." "You remember that much?" Clark asked gently. "She doesn't forget faces," Gideon said. "Smart kid." Luna stepped back, pulled a spiral-bound notebook from her small backpack, and sat cross-legged on the floor. Within minutes, she had sketched the man's face with startling detail: square jaw, cropped hair under the surgical cap, and a jagged line along the left side of his face. Her hand trembled slightly, but her lines were steady. Gideon looked at the drawing, then the screen. It was a match. "Can I get a copy of that clip?" he asked Clark. "Flash drive's in the drawer," the old man said. "But keep it quiet, yeah? I got enough trouble with the HOA. Gideon nodded. "This won't go to the police, not yet." While the footage downloaded, Ranger walked to the front door and let out a low growl. Gideon turned sharply. "What is it?" The dog's body was tense, his nose pressed against the doorframe. He pawed once at the bottom corner. Gideon opened the door slowly and crouched. There, beneath the mailbox, was a faint smear on the metal handle, greasy, barely visible. He pulled out a handkerchief and sniffed. It was chemical. Not common oil or grease, something synthetic. He looked down at Ranger. "You smell that too?" Ranger gave a low, clipped bark. Gideon closed the door, brows furrowed. "You okay?" Clark asked. "No," Gideon said, "but we're getting closer." Luna handed him the sketch. "What are you going to do now?" "Find your mom," he said. She looked up at him, eyes steady and old. "Promise?" He nodded. "I've kept worse promises." As they left, Clark handed Gideon the flash drive. "You're into something ugly," he warned. "I know," Gideon said, "and I'm walking straight into it." The Iron Hollow Community Clinic stood at the edge of town like a place left behind. Its faded green paint peeled from the siding, and the sign above the door hung crooked by one rusted chain. Though it was still technically operational, it hadn't seen full staffing in weeks. Budget cuts, people said, staffing shortages. But Gideon had heard excuses before. The real reasons always hid in the shadows. He parked the truck in the empty lot across the street, glancing at the building through the fogged windshield. Luna sat beside him, her small hands tucked inside his oversized gloves. Jude was wrapped snugly in layers in the back seat, sleeping. "Is this where she worked?" Gideon asked. Luna nodded. "Almost every day." She said helping people made the world feel less broken. Gideon said nothing, but his hands tightened on the steering wheel. Ranger shifted in the passenger seat. His ears flicked forward, his head cocked slightly. The dog let out a low, curious sound. Not alarmed, but aware. "Let's go," Gideon muttered. They stepped into the frigid air, boots crunching on the packed snow. The morning was bitter and dry, the kind of cold that stole breath from your chest. As they approached the front door of the clinic, Gideon paused to scan the surroundings. A light pole stood near the entrance, modern, metallic, with what looked like a weather sensor mounted halfway up. Ranger stopped beneath it. He stared at the sensor and then let out a low, gruff bark. Gideon narrowed his eyes. He stepped closer, examining the device. The sensor had an unnatural seam, too clean, too square. On closer inspection, he saw a tiny lens behind a smudged piece of tinted plastic. "A camera," he muttered, disguised. He didn't touch it, just noted the angle, facing the front door with a clear line of sight into the parking lot. It wasn't standard city equipment, too sleek, too specific. Inside, the clinic was silent. The waiting room held a few scattered chairs and a coffee table cluttered with outdated magazines. The fluorescent lights flickered occasionally, casting an eerie rhythm over the beige walls. Behind the front desk, A woman in her late 40s looked up from a tangle of paperwork. She had curly dark hair pulled into a tight bun, a sunflower pin on her scrubs, and a deeply lined face that softened as her eyes fell on Luna. Her name tag read Marla Dempsey. "Luna!" she gasped, coming around the desk. "Oh my God, sweetheart! Are you okay? Where's your mother?" "She's not here," Luna said softly, holding Jude close. Marla looked at Gideon with alarm, then back to Luna. "Who's this?" "Friend," Gideon answered flatly. "We need to talk about Sienna." Marla guided them into a small break room in the back. Linoleum floors, a buzzing fridge, and a few cracked plastic chairs. She offered tea. No one took it. "She's missing," Gideon said once they were seated. "Taken. Luna says 2 people came dressed as medical staff and left with her before dawn." Marla's expression collapsed. Her fingers trembled as she covered her mouth. "She told me something like this might happen." "What exactly did she tell you?" "She was scared," Marla said. "Sienna wasn't like the rest. She paid attention. Didn't just do the work. She questioned it, especially after Dr. Sylar arrived." Gideon leaned forward. "Who is that?" "Dr. Morven Sylar," she said, her tone tight with distaste. "Came from Portland 6 months ago. Smooth talker. Always wore expensive shoes, silk ties. Claimed he was helping with a post-op drug study, sponsored by a pharmaceutical company. Said it was pain management for rural patients. And Sienna didn't buy it. She checked the charts," Marla continued. "Doses didn't match prescriptions. Patients got meds they never signed for. Some ended up sicker. She filed a formal complaint with administration 3 weeks ago." "What happened after that?" "She started getting letters," Marla said. "Slipped into her locker, no return address. First one just said, 'Careful what you ask for.' The second, I saw it myself." Her voice lowered. "It said, 'Stay silent if you want to keep your daughter alive.'" Luna's breath caught. She didn't cry, but her grip on Jude tightened. Marla reached over gently. "She was trying to protect you, honey. Everything she did was for you and your brother." Gideon looked at Marla. "Did anyone else back her up?" She hesitated. "A few of us agreed something wasn't right, but Sylar had the administrator wrapped around his finger. Mr. Holt, bureaucrat type, late 50s, always in a tailored suit and fake smile. He kept saying we were being paranoid." "Where's Dr. Sylar now?" "Left town 2 days ago," Marla said. "Took a temporary assignment in Denver. But I saw his car here late last night. I thought I imagined it." Gideon rose. "You didn't." He looked out the window toward the street lamp. "Whoever installed that camera is still watching." "I want to help," Marla said, standing. "I owe Sienna that much." "Keep your head down," Gideon warned, "and your door's locked." She nodded. They left the clinic quietly. The snow had begun to fall again, light, fine, almost ash-like. Gideon stood beneath the pole where the camera sat and stared up at it, jaw tight. "Someone's trying to erase her," he muttered. Ranger circled the pole once, then turned his head sharply toward the woods beyond the clinic. He gave a short, urgent bark. "What is it now?" Gideon asked. But the answer would have to wait. For now, they had names, and a trail. The snow had lessened by late afternoon, but the cold was sharper, biting through gloves and scarves with silent teeth. Gideon stood beside his truck, breath rising in clouds, eyes scanning the cracked road that led out of Iron Hollow toward the western woods. The path to Cedarwood was narrow, half forgotten, and wrapped in tree limbs that clawed at the sky like brittle hands. Most people avoided it, even before the old care facility had been shut down. But Gideon wasn't most people. He climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine rumbled reluctantly to life. Ranger jumped into the passenger seat, paws planted, eyes fixed straight ahead like he knew exactly where they were going. In the back, Luna cradled her baby brother, wrapped in layers of blankets and a thick wool coat. She was quiet, but not calm. Jude had grown hotter during the last hour. His skin was flushed, breath shallow, and he whimpered softly in his sleep. "His fever's worse," Luna whispered. "I know," Gideon said. "We'll stop soon. I'll see what I can do." They pulled out slowly, tires crunching over ice. Snow coated the trees like ashes, but the road west had been driven recently. Wide tire marks trailed out of town, through the woods, and toward a place no one talked about anymore. Cedarwood. The name alone stirred memories. It had once been a state-run elder care center, closed after a fire nearly a decade ago. Officially, it was condemned. Unofficially, it had become a ghost story. Whispers of people disappearing near its edge, strange lights flickering through its windows at night. Gideon had never believed in ghost stories, but he believed in men who used empty buildings to hide things they couldn't afford to be found. The truck groaned up a hill, snow thinning where branches shielded the road. Ranger let out a low sound in his throat and turned toward the glove box. Gideon reached over, opened it, and retrieved a small metal case. Inside were basic medical supplies, antibiotics, a thermometer, gauze, field-grade ibuprofen. He glanced at the temp reading on Jude, 101.8 and climbing. "Pull over," Gideon muttered to himself. They stopped at a small clearing where a log cabin ruin had once stood, now just stones and moss and memory. He grabbed the kit and climbed into the back, gently unwrapping Jude. The baby's skin was too warm, and his lips had begun to dry. "What are you doing?" Luna asked, worried. "Cooling him down a little. He's dehydrated." Gideon's voice was calm, but his brow furrowed. "Did your mom give him anything? Medication?" "She had red cap medicine," Luna said. "She said it was for people who couldn't take the normal kind. She called it marrow something." Gideon's eyes sharpened. "Meropenem?" "Yes, that." Gideon exhaled. "That's not baby medication. It's a powerful antibiotic, used only in hospitals. Sienna was hiding something rare." "Is it bad?" "No," he said. "It's what's missing that's bad." As Jude rested, Ranger sniffed around the edges of the clearing, ears alert. His body stiffened suddenly, and he trotted toward a nearby pine trunk, where snow had melted unevenly. He barked once, then pawed at the base. Gideon followed. At Ranger's feet lay a discarded vial, glass, scratched, label half torn but still legible. Meropenem IV use only, lot hash 312A. The seal was broken. Luna stared at it. "That's what Mom kept in her red bag. It was always in the fridge." "How long ago did she use it?" Gideon asked. "She didn't. She said it wasn't for us, that she was keeping it in case someone needed help, someone she was worried about." Gideon pocketed the vial carefully, using a cloth to avoid fingerprints. Ranger barked again, sharper this time. He was pacing now, nose to the ground, tracking. The path veered west through a tight tree corridor, a trail barely visible beneath the snow. Faint tire ruts ran through it, matching those from town. "We're on the right track," Gideon said, "but we need to move fast." He poured a few drops of water into Jude's mouth, wrapped him again, and returned to the truck. Luna didn't speak, but she watched him closely. There was something in her eyes, an old kind of knowing, like she'd had to grow up too quickly. As they drove deeper into the woods, Luna said quietly, "Mom told me once, dogs see things we miss. They know when someone's lying. She said if I ever got lost, I should trust someone with a dog." "She's right," Gideon replied. "She also said people who want to hide bad things, they always hide them in forgotten places." The road narrowed further until they reached a metal gate chained and bolted. A rusted sign read, "Cedarwood State Care Facility, closed by order of the county." The fencing around the perimeter sagged in places, vines curling through the gaps. "End of the line," Gideon said. He got out, bolt cutters in hand. The chain clanged to the ground. Ranger stood beside him, tail stiff, nose twitching with electricity. "We go on foot from here." With Luna on his left and Jude in a sling across his chest, Gideon moved forward into the trees, Ranger leading them like a silent sentinel. Snow drifted down gently now, but the wind whispered through the branches, uneasy. Within 10 minutes, the woods thinned, and Cedarwood emerged. The building was massive and gray, 3 stories high, its windows shattered or boarded, paint blistered and peeled like sunburned skin. A wheelchair sat abandoned near the front ramp, half buried in snow. The sign above the door was charred at one corner. The rest faded. Something about it felt wrong. Not just forgotten, but violated. Ranger let out a soft growl. "Back up," Gideon said to Luna. "Stay behind me." He crouched low, scanning the entrance. And somewhere, deep inside the walls of that rotting place, something moved. The interior of Cedarwood swallowed them in silence. The air was thick with rot and mildew, its weight pressing against the lungs like damp cloth. Dust floated in shafts of dying light piercing the boarded windows, illuminating a world forgotten and disturbed. Gideon's boots thudded softly on the warped linoleum floor. His breath was shallow, rifle gripped in one hand, Ranger at his side, every muscle in the German shepherd's frame drawn tight. Ranger's black and tan fur bristled in the low light, ears pivoting at each distant creak and whistle of wind slipping through cracked glass. Luna followed behind, holding Jude tight to her chest, his feverish body limp against her. Her wide eyes scanned every corner, catching shadows where none should move. They passed through a corridor where the wallpaper peeled like old skin. Along the walls hung faded motivational posters. Kindness heals. Tomorrow is another chance. And we care. Each was stained, some scratched, others barely legible. Wheelchairs sat abandoned. A shattered IV pole lay in the corner near an empty patient bed still buckled to the floor. Ranger suddenly froze. Then he growled, low, primal, from deep in his chest. He turned his head sharply to the left, toward a half-closed door at the end of the hallway. Gideon raised a hand to Luna to halt. He stepped forward first, crouched low, rifle ready. The door creaked open with a gentle push. Inside was a small examination room, or at least it had once been. Now, it looked more like a repurposed cell. The bed was bolted to the floor. Leather restraints dangled from both sides. A single light bulb flickered overhead, its glow swinging with every gust that pushed through the ceiling tiles. Ranger moved forward and stopped at something beneath the sink. Gideon followed and saw it. A white lab coat, rumpled and stained. It was torn at the shoulder, and one sleeve had dried blood smeared across it. He picked it up with gloved hands and turned it over. Embroidered on the front, though faint from wear, were the letters S. Vale. Luna gasped. "That's my mom's," she whispered. "She wore that to work every day. She called it her armor." Gideon's jaw clenched. He folded the coat carefully and placed it in his pack. The room was cluttered with old medical gear. Most of it was rusted or broken, but several items were too clean, scalpels lined neatly on a tray, unopened boxes of syringes, and a locked mini-fridge humming quietly in the corner. He opened a drawer beneath the counter. Inside were handwritten notes, scribbles in a tight, fast hand. Most of it was incomprehensible. Abbreviations, chemical symbols, but one line stood out, underlined twice in red ink. Test subject hash, 7, response remains unstable, dosage pending review. Gideon flipped through several other sheets. Diagrams, vitals, no names, only numbers, notes on reactions, elevated heart rates, adverse neurological responses. And one phrase repeated, compound ZL7 requires recalibration before mass protocol. Luna backed away. "I know this place," she said. "I mean, the smell. Jude's blanket smelled like this. When Mom came home from work once, it was on her." "You're sure?" "Yes." She clutched the baby tighter. "It made me dizzy. I told Mom, and she burned the blanket. But Jude still has another one from that time." Ranger began to pace. He circled the room twice, sniffing under the bed, then turned to Gideon and let out a long, deep howl that echoed off the broken walls. It was a sound Gideon hadn't heard in years, not from Ranger. It was a warning. The last time he'd heard it, they'd been tracking a cartel compound in eastern Honduras. That time, the dog had smelled corpses before the team even breached the wall. "There's something else here," Gideon murmured. He stepped into the adjacent hallway and found another door, this one steel and locked. A keypad had once been mounted beside it, but now hung uselessly by sparking wires. He pulled out a crowbar, wedged it into the frame, and after 2 solid yanks, the door creaked open. The room beyond was sterile white, shockingly clean compared to the rest of Cedarwood. Floodlights were mounted in the ceiling. Along one wall stood 3 hospital beds, each with straps, IV lines, and digital monitors, though most were disconnected. Gideon moved carefully. On a tray beside one bed lay a half-used vial labeled only ZL7. He pocketed it. Then his eyes found what he feared most, a stain on the bed, dark brown and cracked, blood. Fresh at the time of application, now dried, but recent enough to remain pungent. On the table nearby lay a small recording device. He pressed play. The voice that played was male, deep, precise. Subject 7 shows resistance to mid-tier sedation. Genetic markers remain favorable. If response to ZL7 stabilizes within the next 48 hours, proceed to final test. Dr. Sylar has approved continuation despite initial objections from the nurse. Then silence. Gideon didn't speak. He simply stared at the blank wall in front of him, a muscle twitching in his jaw. The recording confirmed it. Sienna had tried to stop them, and they'd punished her for it. But was she still here? He turned to Luna. We need to leave, now. But what if she's... We'll come back, but I can't keep you and Jude safe here, not if someone's still operating inside this place. As they turned to leave, Ranger growled once more, this time toward a hallway deeper inside the building. He refused to budge, staring into the darkness. We'll come back, Gideon promised the dog, not without backup. And with that, they slipped back into the cold light of the forest beyond. The night had begun to bleed into dawn when Gideon returned to Cedarwood. The world outside was still cloaked in blue frost and muffled silence. Snow clung to the trees like solemn witnesses, and the sky held that gray light that comes before truth or danger. Ranger walked ahead, head low, sniffing the ground as if following ghosts. His paws left clear tracks in the snow, soon dusted over by the wind. Behind them, Luna carried Jude wrapped tightly in a wool blanket, cheeks red from the cold, but eyes wide with determination. Gideon had given her a makeshift sling for the baby, crafted from an old army poncho, so her hands were free if she needed to run. But they wouldn't run this time. This time, they came for someone. They entered through the same broken side entrance as before. Gideon had memorized the map of the interior, but it was Ranger who took the lead. Tail rigid, nose twitching. They moved fast, past the holding rooms, through the shattered hallway, until Ranger halted and growled at a metal door they hadn't pried open before. Gideon reached for the handle. Locked. He used the crowbar again. The metal groaned under the strain until finally, with a hard pull, the door gave way. The room was cold. Concrete floors, no windows, only a cot bolted to the wall and a figure on it, bound at the wrists, slumped forward, breathing shallowly. Sienna, Gideon said, softly but firmly. The woman stirred. She was gaunt, her face pale and bruised. Her long auburn hair was matted with sweat and dust, her lips cracked and dry. Still, her green eyes fluttered open and locked on Luna. "Mom!" Luna cried, rushing forward. Sienna blinked once, then a tear slid down her cheek. "Luna! Jude!" Gideon knelt beside her, cutting through the plastic ties with a blade. Her wrists were raw and swollen. "You're safe now," he said, though part of him knew the danger wasn't over. Sienna leaned into his shoulder, breathing hard. "No, you don't understand. It's not just me. There are others." Gideon helped her sit up. "Others?" "They're running clinical trials, off the books. No FDA, no oversight, using meropenem as a base. And now something worse, ZL7. They call it a breakthrough. It's poison." "Who's they?" She shook her head. "I don't know names. They all wear masks, scrubs, gloves, like ghosts." She coughed. Her voice was dry but sharp with memory. "They took patients no one would miss. Old war veterans with no families, kids from foster homes, immigrants with no records. Anyone invisible." A noise, soft, a creak in the hallway. Ranger spun, low growl escaping his throat. Gideon stood and stepped in front of the others, rifle raised. "Stay back," he warned Luna. "Take your mom and get ready to run." From the darkness of the hall, a man emerged, dressed in a clean white surgical coat. His face was hidden behind a sterile hospital mask and dark goggles. No visible features, no insignia. He raised a hand. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," Gideon said coldly. "Step back." But the man charged without another word, a syringe glinting in his hand. Ranger leapt before Gideon could fire. The collision was a blur, fur, limbs, a scream. The syringe skidded across the floor. Ranger slammed the man to the ground with the full force of his body. The masked figure thrashed, trying to throw the dog off. But Ranger's training was flawless. He held fast, teeth bared just above the man's throat. "Don't move," Gideon ordered, stepping closer. The man's hand twitched toward his coat pocket. Ranger snarled. Gideon kicked the hand aside and quickly zip-tied the attacker's wrists behind his back. He yanked the mask off. revealing a man in his mid-30s, clean-shaven, thin lips, and a pale complexion. A long scar ran from his right ear to the corner of his mouth. "Recognize him?" Gideon asked Sienna. She nodded slowly. "He ran the overnight shifts. Said he was a tech. Always quiet. I never saw him smile." Luna clutched Jude tighter, her gaze fixed on the unconscious man. "We're not staying," Gideon said. "Get what we can and get out." He moved fast, sweeping through cabinets and drawers in the corner of the room. There were folders, patient IDs, test results, sealed bags of blood samples. He took everything he could stuff into his backpack, including 2 small vials of ZL7 and a hard drive labeled Sylar Prelim Reports. As he turned back, Sienna's legs gave out. Gideon caught her in time. "I've got you," he said. "We're going home." Outside, the wind had picked up. Snow swirled like angry whispers, but the cold felt less oppressive now. They didn't speak much on the way back. Ranger stayed close, ever watchful. The attacker remained zip-tied, unconscious, dragged behind on a sled made of scavenged bed rails. The man groaned but didn't wake. Sienna didn't let go of her children the whole way. And Gideon? For the first time in years, he felt like a soldier again. But this time, the war had no battlefield. It had faces without names, and names without faces. The forest road that wound through the frost-bitten pines felt eerily quiet. Too quiet. Gideon knew better than to trust stillness. He moved with calculated steps, eyes scanning the treetops, hand never straying far from the grip of his rifle. Behind him, Sienna limped along, with Luna clinging to her side, still carrying baby Jude, swaddled tight. Ranger, though wounded from the scuffle at Cedarwood, pressed ahead with undiminished resolve, his sharp black and tan frame alert to every shadow, every sound. His left flank bore a crimson streak from a cut, but his ears were pricked, his eyes blazing with focus. Snow had begun falling again, soft flakes like the hush before a storm. They were no more than a mile from Gideon's cabin when he felt it, a shift in the air, a wrongness pressing from the trees. Then came the sharp crack of a branch snapping. "Down!" Gideon roared, diving with practiced instinct. A bullet whizzed past where his head had just been, embedding into a tree trunk with a dull thud. Chaos erupted. From the trees emerged 3 masked men clad in matte black tactical gear, the kind not sold in stores. Their helmets bore no insignia, their movements fluid and rehearsed. One raised a suppressed rifle, aiming at Sienna. Before the shot fired, Ranger lunged, snarling, a blur of fur and fury, slamming into the assailant's leg and throwing him off balance. The rifle discharged into the ground as the man fell back, screaming. Another turned his aim on the dog. "Ranger!" Luna screamed. Gideon fired 3 shots in rapid succession, one to the chest, one to the shoulder, one to the tree behind for distraction. The man fell backward, groaning, his weapon skittering away in the snow. The third attacker vanished behind a line of brush. "Smoke!" Sienna yelled. She had grabbed a flare from Gideon's dropped pack and snapped it. A puff of thick gray smoke rose instantly, masking their position. Gideon pulled Sienna and the kids behind a fallen log, the smoke curling around them. Ranger limped to his side, panting heavily, blood darkening the snow beneath his belly. His eyes never left the smoke. From the edge of the fog, a voice called out. Calm, educated, even rehearsed. "Gideon Hale, I believe you have something of mine." It wasn't a question. A tall figure emerged, clean-shaven, late 50s, dressed not in combat gear but a long charcoal overcoat and scarf. He wore leather gloves and a pale gray suit underneath, tailored but practical. His hair was silver, neatly combed, and his eyes, cold steel blue, held no fear. Sienna gasped. "Edwin Royce!" Gideon narrowed his eyes. "You're real." Royce smiled faintly. "More real than most men you've served with, I suspect." Dr. Edwin Royce had been a ghost, rumored to be the mind behind a series of illegal human trials across abandoned facilities in the Northeast. Once a respected pharmacologist and advisor to private biotech firms, he vanished from the public eye after a scandal involving unapproved serums on terminal patients. No charges had stuck. Until now. "You're trespassing," Gideon said. "You took property," Royce replied, stepping closer, boots crunching lightly over snow. "Test subject 7, and my data. That was a mistake." "You made a bigger one?" Gideon said, eyes never leaving Royce. "Coming here." Behind the smoke, a sound, a low thrum. The beat of helicopter rotors echoing through the mountains. Royce's face twitched. Sirens split the silence moments later. Red and blue lights bounced between the trees. A voice barked over a megaphone. "This is the North Fall County SWAT. Drop your weapons. Hands where we can see them." Royce didn't move, but the remaining armed men began backing away. One dropped his gun, the other froze mid-step. "I alerted them an hour ago," Gideon said flatly. "Right after I found Sienna. You weren't the only one with a plan." Royce slowly raised his hands, a smirk returning to his face. "How noble of you." Ranger snarled, lips curled. He lunged forward and pinned Royce to the ground as officers surged from the forest. In minutes, the attackers were restrained and being read their rights. Sienna collapsed to her knees in relief. Luna clung to her, sobbing, while Jude stirred gently in her arms. A burly SWAT officer approached Gideon. "You're Hale, right? They said you were the one who called in the location." Gideon nodded. "Good work. We've got Royce on record now, and your footage, that'll bury him." Sienna stood, her voice still shaking. "He experimented on humans. My patients. My son could have been next." The officer tipped his hat. "Not anymore, ma'am. Not on our watch." Ranger sat next to Gideon, still panting, eyes on the retreating figures. His body trembled, but his tail wagged once when Luna reached out to touch his head gently. "You saved us again," she whispered, "just like Mom said. Dogs see what people miss." Gideon crouched beside her, one hand resting on Ranger's broad back. "For the first time in years," he murmured, "I feel like I didn't miss what mattered." The snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of brown grass and mud that clung stubbornly to the soles of Gideon's boots. The mountain cabin, once silent and shadowed with sorrow, now echoed with the soft giggles of a little girl and the distant babble of a baby. But they were not here anymore. That chapter had closed. It had been exactly 4 weeks since the night of the ambush and Royce's arrest. Sienna, Luna, and baby Jude had been moved under federal witness protection to the quiet township of Evergreen Hills, a sleepy place nestled beyond the next ridge. The government had provided them a modest home, white picket fence, a small garden, and, more importantly, peace. Sienna had regained some color in her cheeks. No longer haunted by fluorescent lights and windowless rooms, she walked straighter now, her dark auburn hair no longer pulled into a utilitarian bun, but loose over her shoulders. She had returned to the work she loved, taking a part-time position at the Evergreen Health and Outreach Center, helping underfunded families. Her smile remained cautious, yet it surfaced more often, especially when she looked at her children. Luna, now always with her sketchbook, had transformed from the trembling child in a red coat to a vibrant storyteller. Her favorite place was the sunroom, where warm light filtered through lace curtains onto the pages she filled with colored pencil drawings. Her current project was something she took very seriously, a graphic novel titled Ranger, the Four-Legged Hero. Page by page, she brought to life their journey through the snow, Ranger's bravery, and Gideon's quiet strength. When asked why she drew them so strong, she would simply say, "Because that's how I saw them." Back in Northfall, Gideon remained in the cabin. He had chosen not to relocate. The program offered him a move, new ID, new name, but Gideon declined. This was his home, his quiet corner of the world, and perhaps for the first time in years, the silence no longer echoed. He wasn't alone. Ranger sat beside him now on the wooden porch, head high, tail resting calmly across the steps. The old German shepherd had recovered well from the bullet graze, though he moved slower now, a reminder of age and sacrifice. The scars remained on his left flank, and one more on the inside of his front leg, but they didn't diminish him. If anything, they added to his quiet dignity. His coat, black streaked with tan and a hint of silver around the muzzle, had been brushed with care that morning. A new collar hung around his neck, one engraved with the words, "Valor Companion." It was awarded by the state for service and bravery. When the day came for the ceremony, Ranger had sat proudly at Gideon's side in the community hall, tail swishing with slow grace, eyes alert. Children from town had drawn crayon pictures of him. A boy even asked for his paw print as an autograph. Gideon, in his only ironed shirt and old military jacket, had accepted the plaque and ribbon with a nod, barely saying a word. But Ranger had barked once, strong and clear, as if acknowledging the honor in his own way. The bond between man and dog had only deepened. Gideon no longer treated Ranger like a tool of war or a partner of duty. He spoke to him like a brother. They walked every morning, rain or shine. Ranger always knew which coat was for storm weather and which was for warm air. At night, he lay at the foot of Gideon's bed, his breathing steady, comforting. It was more than companionship. It was survival. Still, Gideon's scars remained, not the ones on his skin, but the invisible ones. The tremors came some nights, triggered by a smell, a word, a moment of silence too long. But now, when they came, Ranger would nudge his hand gently or rest his head on Gideon's chest, grounding him. And in those small gestures, something inside Gideon healed, bit by bit. He had begun writing again. Not full sentences at first, but notes, on the margins of books, on napkins, on the back of bills, reflections. Sometimes just one word, trust, or hope. Words he had long stopped believing in, but they came back, like seeds under thawed earth. In Evergreen Hills, Sienna sent letters, handwritten ones, with ink slightly smudged. Luna always added a drawing. One envelope carried a cartoon of Ranger wearing a cape, leaping over snowdrifts. Another had a stick figure of Gideon smiling, hair turning into fire as he roared at the villains. He kept each one in a cigar box under his bed. A letter from Sienna arrived that morning. She wrote of Jude's first word. It had been dog, of course. She also included a newspaper clipping from their local gazette. Local hero rebuilds her life, the headline read. Below it, a photo of Sienna in a white coat, holding Luna's hand outside the clinic. Gideon had stared at that photo longer than he meant to. He folded it carefully and tucked it into the box. That afternoon, a visitor arrived, Daniel Franks, a young park ranger in his late 20s, with shaggy brown hair and a permanent 5 o'clock shadow. Friendly but observant, he wore his badge more like a belt buckle than a symbol of authority. He brought Ranger a new toy, a rubber bone, and handed Gideon an envelope from the mayor's office. It was a formal request. Would Gideon consider joining the Community Emergency Response Council? Not a job, just advice, guidance, help with search efforts if future storms came. He didn't answer right away, but something in Ranger's knowing glance, in the soft wind that passed through the thawing trees, made him lean forward and whisper, maybe. As the sun dipped below the ridge, Gideon rose, walked to the edge of the hill, and watched the shadows stretch long. Ranger sat beside him. There was no more snow, no more blood, only the quiet creak of old wood and the promise of spring. The road to Evergreen Hills curved gently through thawed meadows, where dandelions were beginning to bloom like scattered stars across an emerald sky. Gideon sat behind the wheel of his old Jeep, one hand steady on the wheel, the other occasionally reaching down to scratch Ranger behind the ears. The German Shepherd, now 7 years old, sat tall in the passenger seat, ears twitching with every breeze, his golden brown fur catching slivers of afternoon sun that filtered through the windshield. The closer they got, the more alert Ranger became, as if he already knew the exact direction to the people he loved. Evergreen Hills looked like a painting untouched by war or sorrow. There was a swing hanging from a maple tree, laundry danced lightly on a clothesline, a wooden porch welcomed visitors not with grandeur, but with warmth. And near the porch, sunflowers had begun to bloom despite the early season. Tall, defiant, and unapologetically bright. Sienna stood at the door, holding Jude, now giggling and stronger, his cheeks rosy. Her figure was thinner than it once was, but her presence carried a quiet strength. She wore a simple sundress of faded blue, her auburn hair pulled back in a braid that trailed down one shoulder. Her green eyes met Gideon's as he approached, not with surprise, but a smile that had been waiting. "You came," she said. "I promised," he replied, eyes falling to Jude, who let out a delighted squeal at the sight of Ranger. Luna was in the backyard, drawing chalk figures on the stone path. She wore a yellow hoodie with sleeves too long for her arms and a crown of clover atop her blonde hair. When she saw Ranger, she dropped the chalk and ran full speed. Ranger met her halfway, tail wagging in slow, loyal arcs. She buried her face in his fur, whispering things only he could hear. Then, in the most natural gesture, she took Gideon's hand and led him to the porch swing. "Ranger missed you," she said. crawling up beside the dog and resting her head against his broad chest. Within minutes, she was asleep, small fingers still curled into his fur, as if dreaming of snowy trails and silent guardians. Sienna brought out 2 cups of tea and sat beside Gideon, Jude in her lap. "He still has nightmares sometimes," she said softly, nodding toward Luna. "But with Ranger around, they don't last long." Gideon nodded, watching Luna's chest rise and fall. "He has that effect." They sat in silence for a while, surrounded by rustling leaves and the occasional chime from windbells hanging near the window. Gideon traced the rim of his cup with a calloused finger before glancing over. "You doing okay?" Sienna looked out toward the garden, where a pair of neighborhood cats sunned themselves in the dirt. "Better than I expected. The clinic's small, but honest work. Jude's healthy. Luna, she still draws like she's trying to stitch the world back together." She paused, then looked at him with a quiet intensity. "And you? Still keeping the mountains safe?" Gideon gave a half smile. "Trying. Daniel Franks drops by every week with coffee too bitter to drink and updates on which kid got lost chasing a raccoon. He still can't read a compass." She laughed, a gentle sound that seemed to warm the air itself. "Sounds like peace." He shrugged. "As close as I've ever known." Sienna leaned back against the porch railing, shifting Jude to her shoulder. The baby was nearly asleep. "You ever wonder," she asked after a moment, "how Ranger always knew which way to go? Through the snow, through the dark, how he never once hesitated?" Gideon glanced at the dog, now dozing under Luna's arm. "He hears things we only feel," he said. "The earth's breath, the fear in footsteps, the hope in a heartbeat." Sienna didn't respond right away, but she smiled, tired, grateful, whole. As the sun began to lower itself gently into the tree line, Luna stirred and blinked awake. She reached under the swing and pulled out a folder made of construction paper, carefully tied with blue string. "I finished it," she whispered, handing it to Gideon. "The last page." Inside was the final drawing for Ranger, the 4-legged hero. It showed a small cabin surrounded by mountains. Inside, drawn with the clumsy precision only a child could master, were 4 figures. A little girl with a crown of flowers, a baby in arms, a woman with kind eyes, and a man with a square jaw and tired smile. At their feet lay a dog with a golden heart drawn on its chest. "Is that me?" Gideon asked, touched. Luna nodded. "Mom said families aren't always about the beginning. Sometimes they're about who stays until the end." He swallowed something thick in his throat, folding the paper gently. Later that evening, after dinner and stories, Gideon stood at the porch, ready to leave. Ranger hesitated at his side. "You could stay," Sienna said, barefoot on the steps. "Just for tonight. The guest room is quiet. No echoes." Gideon looked at Ranger, then at Luna's drawing in his hands. Maybe just one night. And in the fading light of a world thawing from grief, they stepped inside. Not as broken pieces, but as something whole. Sometimes, miracles don't come as thunder or lightning. Sometimes, they arrive on 4 paws, in the middle of a snowstorm, when all hope seems lost. They come through the loyalty of a dog, the courage of a child, and the quiet faith of a broken soldier who chooses to believe again. This story reminds us that even in the darkest forests, there is a path home. If we dare to follow love, if we listen with more than just our ears. Maybe God doesn't always shout. Sometimes he whispers, through a child's drawing, a dog's bark, or a stranger's choice to stop and care. If this story touched you, we invite you to. Leave a comment to bless others. God still sends angels. Share this story to remind someone they're not alone. Subscribe for more stories where hope walks beside us, on 2 legs or 4. And may the Lord watch over you and your loved ones, even when you least expect it. Because sometimes miracles wear fur.